Welcome to the Lighthouse Financial Advisors Money Over 50 podcast with Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue. This information is general in nature and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation or needs. Therefore, you should consider whether the information is appropriate for you and your personal circumstances. If you require personal advice, please contact Lighthouse Financial Advisors. Here are your hosts, Dallas Davison and Michael Hogue.
Today we're going to talk about a big issue that we see in a lot of people leading up to their retirement, which is what should they do with their home that they've lived in for normally the last 20, 30 years. It's a big decision, both emotionally and financially. Michael's done a fair bit more research than me around this in the last couple of months. He actually wrote an article for our website about this just recently, so he's kind of the resident expert with this sort of thing. So I'll throw to him a fair bit, but firstly, just let me introduce Michael Hogue.
Thanks, Dallas.
So basically, you've broken it down here that there's three main options that we can look at with your existing home leading up to retirement. Is that right?
There is. So the three main options are to either keep your existing home that you've lived in for most of your life, let's assume, raised your family in. The second option is to downsize. And the third option is to rent. So we'll go through those in more detail. However, the overarching statement that I'd like to make is that you are almost always financially better off if you live in a lower cost house as opposed to a higher cost house. Now, I say financially because there are reasons that you would live in a more expensive house, of course, lifestyle-wise, perhaps, or sentimental values. But you're almost always financially better off living in a lower-cost house.
Yeah, and so for most people, the higher cost house would be the house that they're in currently, given that most people have raised a family in a bigger home, and they're now, by the time they come in to see us, empty nesters or on the way to kicking the freeloaders out, and so they've got a bit more space. They could potentially move into a smaller house and free up some capacity there.
Yeah, that's right. So the option to downsize, first of all, the main advantage of that is it does free up equity.
And when you say equity, you mean the difference between the value of their existing house and what they could buy elsewhere for in a smaller property?
That's correct. Yeah. So if you're downsizing, you're selling a more expensive home, you're buying a lower cost home, and the rule of thumb that we look for is that you would want to generally achieve a result of coming away with an extra $100,000 of change.
Yeah. That
could be invested ideally inside your superannuation fund, because you could then draw a tax-free income from that in retirement generally. And the rule of thumb that we'll work on, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail, is that if you do come away with that extra $100,000 in downsizing, so it's selling a more expensive home, buying a lower cost home, coming away with $100,000 to put in towards your superannuation ideally and invest that money at an 8% average rate of return inside your superannuation fund, that would allow you to draw $10,000 of additional income each year for a period of 20 years before that $100,000 runs out. So just think about the change to your lifestyle there. For 20 years, you could really go on, say, 20 overseas holidays over the first 20 years of your retirement for the cost of $10,000 per year. You could put that money towards some other form of lifestyle. You could be short of where you need to be from a retirement point of view. So that extra $100,000 if achieved would
makes a huge difference for most people leading up to and into. The other one, I guess, to look at is that, so that's assuming that you were to sell that property and then at retirement. I guess another one to look at is that if you're sort of 10 years out from retirement and you can free up that $100,000, like you say, contribute that into your super fund, invest it through there, you could potentially, on average, again at that rate of return, you'd be looking at pretty much doubling that over the last 10 years of your working life. So I guess it's even more effective if you can do that earlier, say at 55, if you're working towards retiring at 65. Downsize at 55, get that $100,000 in there and have that grow while you're continuing to work, and then be at retirement with an additional $200,000 at that point in time.
That's an excellent point. So doing this earlier rather than later makes more of a financial difference. So that's a great point. And we do often see, so the average age of our clients coming to us for the first time is somewhere in the 50 to 55 year old range. And as you know, we see a lot of people at 55 and their youngest child has just recently left the family home. So it's potentially something that they could do at an earlier stage.
Yeah.
Rather than a later stage.
Yeah, I find it's a great way to kickstart that retirement saving. So we speak about this a fair bit, where getting your super balance from $300,000 to $400,000 it's hard work and takes a fair bit of time, but getting it from $800,000 to $900,000 tends to be a lot easier, just because your money is actually doing your work for you. So if you could free up $100,000 here, it's a great way to kick that off and get from, if you're coming in with $300,000, gets you straight to that $400,000, gets the ball rolling for you in advance of all the rest of the things that you can do over that last 10 years.
Another excellent point, because you're right, it's the size of your balance that does a lot of the heavy lifting for you towards the latter years of your retirement. So if you can, you're right, if you can add on an extra $100,000 to your balance, which as a couple age 55 would typically we see a lot of couples age 55 somewhere between a combined balance of $500,000 to $600,000 inside their combined superannuation fund. So if you can add on an extra $100,000 at that point in time, it just gets a bigger compounding asset base working for you.
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the pros of downsizing. There are a few other advantages I think you sort of alluded to in the past.
So in downsizing, so if we go back to the reasons you may keep your house, as opposed to downsizing first, there are some reasons to keep your existing house. One of the ones that I've written down here, and this is not an exhaustive list, but the first one I'd say is that the home still suits you. So your part B of that is that you really like your neighbours, you like the neighbourhood, you're familiar with that. You already perhaps have sufficient finances to retire already, so if you can keep the bigger house, then why not? And the last reason would be sentimental value. So you've raised your family there, and for those of you who don't know, and you wouldn't know because this is our first podcast, Dallas doesn't have much of a sentimental
value on most things.
So I can appreciate sentimental value. I'm not a Trekkie at all, but I've watched quite a few episodes of Star Trek late at night, perhaps when I can't sleep, and I've noticed that Spock from Star Trek doesn't have a sentimental bone in his body either. He relies purely on logic, and that's Dallas.
Yep.
Which is a good attribute to have as a financial advisor, actually.
Yeah, it's probably a fair statement.
So there could be these reasons to keep your house. On the negative sides to keeping your existing house is that it's generally larger and more costly to maintain.
Yeah. And I know you've looked at this in a fair bit of detail, Michael, because we, like you say, I actually live in a rented unit at the moment. Again, because given that there's no sentimental bone in my body, I don't see the financial value in owning a home for me at this stage. Mike, you bought a house a few years ago, and you've actually kept track of all these costs over the last few years, haven't you?
I have. I've kept a track of what it's cost to maintain the house, and I've only been in my existing house since January 2016, so we're not quite at 3 years yet. My belief is that it costs somewhere in the vicinity of about 2% of the value of the house to maintain each year, which for most places is somewhere in the vicinity of about $7,000 to $10,000 per year. Yeah. And people will hear that naturally and think, well, it doesn't cost that much to maintain my house. But if you go through everything, one of the things that the house that we bought and moved into was only 10 years old, and one of the things we learned is that split system air conditioning doesn't last much longer than 10 years. So there was a cost there after 10 years of roughly $12,000 to replace all of the split system units. Yeah. So if you do the math on that, that's about $1,200 a year. Yeah. Just in air conditioning. And
there tends to be a lot of those, like we say, in the costs of holding a bigger property. There's those hidden costs that tend to trip people up, because obviously you see your rates bill, you see your insurance bill every month. When you then have to replace a roof once every 30 years for $20,000, you don't tend to allocate that money every year. It just tends to be a shocking thing that comes sort of suddenly.
And we'll talk more about the true cost of maintenance later on when we look at the third option, which is to rent, so to sell your existing house and not downsize, to rent. But if we come back to remaining in your existing house into your retirement, it's generally larger and more costly to maintain, so that's a given. The other major disadvantage is that usually you do have equity in that house, because it tends to be a 4-bedroom to 5-bedroom house that you raise your family in. We're at the point where we assume, let's hope, that your kids, who would be generally fully functioning adults, let's hope again, by the time that you retire, if you're listening to this, would have left the house by that stage. So the need for a 4 or 5-bedroom house can potentially come down to a 3-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom unit. So you have equity in that, and that equity is the money that could be freed up if you sold, downsized to a lower cost house or unit, and were to be able to put that money towards your superannuation or your retirement savings balance to draw an income from.
That's I think another thing that we notice with the downsizing, or with moving into a smaller home. For a lot of people, they tend to like having a spare bedroom, and that's sort of something that, like you say, if you're a couple now with the kids off your hand living in a 4-bedroom house, a lot of people will say, oh well, it's good that I've got friends that come and stay with me occasionally when they're in town, all that sort of thing. Again, it's one of those things, it's just a matter of looking at the numbers of that, but what we tend to find is that it's actually a massive cost per night for those friends to come and stay when you take into account the equity that is tied up in that house. So, like we say, you're probably in a lot of cases better off saying to your friend, listen, I'll shout a hotel room for you, I'll put you up at Jupiter's Casino for the night for a $200 a night hotel room. You're still going to be better off financially compared to selling that spare room effectively and having that equity that you're working harder.
Absolutely. So back to the example of downsizing. So you downsize and you buy a lower cost home. That frees up, let's assume in this example, $100,000. That goes into your superannuation funds, and assuming again that you're over the age of 60 and retired, that money can then go into a tax-free account-based pension, which is superannuation. Think of that as superannuation Part B. You're actually drawing an income from it now. So the rate of return is tax-free, and the income that you draw from that is tax-free. So if you think about that extra $100,000 going in at let's assume an 8% rate of return, and that's just an assumption for the purposes of this discussion today. That may or may not occur depending on what investment strategy that you're in. But if you assume an 8% rate of return, that $100,000 earns you $8,000 in that first year. Now, if you were to draw $8,000 out, you could do that tax-free, and it would give you an extra $8,000 of income into perpetuity. For the example that I've used today, I've just assumed that you draw $10,000 out each year, so the money after year one, you invest $100,000, it earns an 8% rate of return. It increases the value to $108,000 of that $100,000. You take $10,000 out of that, which drops the value back to $98,000. So if you were to continue to take that $10,000 out, that $100,000 dropping to $98,000 would run out after 20 years.
Yeah.
But the advantage there, so the advantages that I see here are that makes a huge difference to your lifestyle.
Yeah.
So an extra $10,000 gives you the ability, like I said, to do 20 overseas holidays or to travel Australia every year.
Yeah.
You still get to pass on an asset to your children, which is your house.
Yep.
So even if you spent all of your retirement savings plus the extra $100,000 that you put in, which you would have in this example, you still have a house. So you can still pass that on to your children when you go. You still have the stability of home ownership, so you still are able to live in the same street and not be at the whim of a landlord that may be selling and you need to move. And you can also sell your existing house capital gains tax free if it's your principal place of residence, which it would be, because we're talking about this is your family home here. So in downsizing, you can sell a $400,000 or $500,000 house, or I mean, I'm putting a figure on it. It doesn't have to be a figure to be capital gains tax free. It doesn't matter what the figure is. It's capital gains tax free if it's your principal place of residence. The potential disadvantages.
Sorry, Mike. Just with that, a point that I just thought of while you were discussing the ability to draw an income from there is one of the advantages of both the downsizing and the renting option we look at is that gives you a bit more flexibility around how and when you draw that income. So a lot of people that we speak to basically say, I've already taken care of my kids for 20 years. They're on their own now. I don't feel the need to pass anything on to them. And so for those people, you would effectively go, okay, you've got your $100,000 that you've freed up. You can have a great time with that. Spend $10,000 a year and draw that down over that 20-year period. However, if you were of a mind to say, well, I want to be able to pass that on to my kids or grandkids or something like that in the future, it's very easy to just dial back that income draw from that. For example, you could say, well, I'll take $5,000 a year out of that $100,000. You still get the addition to your lifestyle. You can still do some of those things, potentially go on a trip every second year. However, you've still got that asset base, that $100,000 is continuing to grow and work for you in the background, so that, I guess, we think of assets to pass on to our children just as kind of the family home, but that is another way to think of it. Is it's just a different way to pass that on to the kids or the grandkids or whatever. Is just to have that in your account-based pension or in your super fund versus having it tied up in the family home. And I guess in some cases it's a more flexible way to do that as well, is to not have all of your assets tied up in one property, which then has to be sold to free up cash to pay out whoever your beneficiaries are. There can be some money that's in a bit more of a liquid form through your account-based pension at the end of the day.
That's right. I think it does create extra flexibility. It's a very good point. Yeah.
So you were saying about some of the cons of downsizing?
So the cons would be that there's change, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's change. So you're used to living in that home for a long-term period of time, so you have to change. You're moving to a new neighbourhood, so you could be unlucky to move into a street where there's noisy neighbours, for example. So you'd have to be careful. It's probably just a thing to be aware of when doing this, or if doing this, to really do your research on where you buy, because you need to like that area. You need to,
and that's, I guess, a big one. Like we talk about this a fair bit with. Particularly when you're moving, not just downsizing, but moving to a new location, either moving to a new suburb or to a completely new town. In a lot of cases, it makes sense to go and rent somewhere for 6 months or 12 months to really get a feel and understanding for the place and where in particular within there you want to be, but also as a bit of a trial run to make sure that is what you want to do, and make sure that is where you want to end up for the long term.
It's another good point, because you see people that move, in many times they move cities, buy a new house, think that they're going to like this city and like that area, and find out that they don't, and they end up selling in the new city and moving back to the old city.
Yep.
So they've actually enacted 3 transactions. They've sold their existing home, bought a new home in a new city, and moved back, sold that, and bought another house back in the existing city, which doesn't put any money in their pocket. It puts a lot of money in the government's pocket and real estate agents' pockets.
Yeah.
But not too much in their pocket. So
and that's, I guess, one of the disadvantages of downsizing is that there is that transaction cost on buying and selling property.
That's right. So one of the disadvantages, or one of the things to be aware of, is to measure the true cost of downsizing. So we see some mistakes there, and one of the key mistakes is to not measure the true cost. So I've just looked at the numbers on the sale of a $500,000 house. So from a real estate point of view, real estate agents generally charge 5% on the first $18,000 of sale value, and then 2.5% thereafter. So that's about $13,000 of real estate agent fees on a $500,000 house. I've assumed that you have some real estate advertising costs of about $2,500 as well. Stamp duty in Queensland this is on the replacement house, and I've assumed that you've bought a replacement house here for $350,000. You've sold one for $500,000.
Yep.
You've bought a replacement house for $350,000. So it's 1% in Queensland for houses that are $350,000 or less. So it's a $3,500 stamp duty cost. Just be careful that stamp duty actually goes up in percentage for houses over $350,000 when you're buying a replacement house, and you pay that on the purchase of a replacement house, not the sale. And legals, conveyancing, etc. I've just allocated $1,000, so that comes to about $20,000 of cost. And let's assume it's going to range between $20,000 to $25,000 in cost on the sale of a $500,000 house in this case. The other mistakes that we see, so people don't often measure that. The other mistakes that we see is that they buy the replacement house before they've sold the existing house, which inevitably leads to a problem when they go to sell the existing home. They can't get what they thought they would get for it. So they're stuck a little bit then. In terms of, they think they can sell for $500,000. They buy a replacement house before they sell for $350,000, and they would have to generally do that by a bridging loan. So they borrow $350,000 for a period of time. They go to sell the $500,000 house, and they find out the best offer is $420,000. So they're stuck.
And that's something that we've seen a lot of, particularly in the last few years. We often find that when you say to someone, what is your house worth? And they'll say, I paid X amount for it. You go, well, but that's not necessarily what the market value of that house is. And it's an easy thing to do, to get anchored to thinking, well, if I paid $500,000 for this house, it's worth $500,000. So, like you say, it's just another one to be aware of, the true cost of transacting, but also the true value of what is my existing home worth. Am I going to be able to sell it for what I think? And like you say, the easiest way to avoid getting caught there is to sell that first, is to go, okay, well, if I'm going to put that on the market, that is what the true value of that is what someone is willing to pay me for that right now.
We think it's the only way to go, to sell your existing house first if you're downsizing.
Yeah.
You actually then, you've completed one big question mark of the equation,
That's
which
right.
is what is my house
Really
worth?
Yeah.
And you then know that you then know how much you have to go shopping for a replacement house.
Yeah.
And you can also then make a better decision if the market is soft. And using that example, if you thought it was worth $500,000 and you were going to buy a replacement house for $350,000, but the best offer you could get in trying to sell your existing house was $420,000, then you may rethink doing it at that point in time.
That's right. Yeah.
Because the general assumption here is that you'd also want to free up a minimum of $50,000 extra to put into your superannuation, preferably more than that. So the strategy really loses its bang if the changeover only nets an amount of $50,000 or less. So the overarching objective would be that you would want that to be $100,000 or more, ideally.
Yeah. It's like you say, it's an interesting one where once you have actually transacted in that market and sold that first property, there's those advantages of how much cash you've got to go shopping, and I guess the other one is that you also have a very good idea of what the market value is of the properties that you're looking at as well. So, like you say, if you're listing your property for $500,000 and you're looking at other properties that are listed for $350,000, and you find that you actually sell your house for $450,000, well, that's probably a good indicator that you can go and push back on some of those asking prices on the properties that you're looking at.
That's right.
Yeah. So this is one that we see a lot, and one of the important things with all this is to make sure that you have a real estate agent that you can trust and that you can sort of rely on what they are telling you, because that is a common sort of theme, is that some real estate agents will basically tell you the value of your property is whatever they feel they need to tell you to get the deal across the line, and then once you've signed up with an exclusive listing with them, they'll then chisel that price back down, and you'll end up in a position, like you say, where you think your house is worth $500,000, your agent has told you that it's worth $500,000, and yet the best offer that you can get is $420,000. So that's, I guess, another part of it is really making sure that you're working with someone in that area that you can trust. And there are some very good agents out there, very trustworthy guys that will be able to help you in making sure that you know what that real value is.
Another good point, because that's another, like you said, it's another trap that we see. People have an overinflated expectation of what their house is really worth from real estate agents sometimes competing to get their work.
Yeah.
The other one to be careful of, and it's not a reason not to do it, but it's just another equation here, is that if you are achieving the age pension or are set to achieve the age pension, in downsizing your house, coming away with extra money that is generally classed as an extra financial asset, which may affect your age pension a little bit.
Yeah.
However, we still don't think it's a reason not to do it, because of the fact that your age pension may drop a little bit, but your overall income will almost always increase by quite a bit.
Yeah.
And with the extra $100,000 in that example, you could potentially run that money down faster by spending more of it.
Yep.
And your age pension would naturally just go back up to where it was.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, one with Centrelink planning. It's similar to tax planning, where we look at this and you really want to go, what's going to put me overall in the best position? So maximising your Centrelink benefits is great, if and when possible, but if you're making financial decisions based purely around maximising Centrelink, it may not be the best decision.
That's right.
So that's kind of the downsizing model, which, like I said, most people are fairly comfortable with that because they've owned a home for sort of 20, 30 years. They understand the concept of, okay, well, we'll continue being homeowners, we'll free up some of that equity that we had in that bigger property that we might have raised our kids in. We'll go and buy a smaller property. The third option there, which we haven't sort of got to yet, was actually just to sell your existing property and rent. Now, this is normally a harder one for people to get their head around or to be comfortable with, but you've got a contentious statement that you like to make with clients when they're looking at this, or when you raise this as an option with them.
I do. The contentious statement is that rent isn't dead money. Rent is free if done right. I know a lot of people will be listening to this, shaking their heads, because it's a widely accepted norm that rent is dead money. However, when we look at it, so the example that I've used here is a $350,000 house. So I've cut back on the value of the house, but I'm just assuming here that someone's reached retirement age, they fully own a $350,000 house,
Yep.
and let's assume that that's what they would come away with after the costs of selling that house,
Yep.
if they were to sell that. I'm going to say that for them to fully own that house without any loan on it, or any debt on that house, it's costing them about $14,000 per year to hold that house. And the cost breaks down as council rates of circa $3,500 per year, home insurance of circa $3,500 per year, and maintenance at 2% of the value of the house, which comes in at $7,000 per year. So we're at $14,000 a year to hold that house.
Yeah, and that's the point you made before, is that's an average cost, but it is a real cost. You know, in that first year, you may be lucky to get away with just having the rates and the insurance of $7,000. Your maintenance might be minimal, but we know that at some stage in that next 20 years, there are going to be some good-sized maintenance bills coming in. So we can't just ignore them because they aren't coming in on a regular basis. We really do need to allow for that as a real cost over time.
That's right. So the things that I've done in my house, like I said before, just in the last 2.5 years, the air conditioning. So there's $12,000 of cost there. There has been termite damage, which costs $3,000 to have the chemical put in the ground to keep termites out. It costs about another $1,000 to have some work fixed. The house needs a paint very shortly. We have a 2.5-year-old and a 12-month-old. We're delaying the painting because they eat Vegemite and put their hands on the walls. So it really could do with the paint now, inside and out. So, the house is only 12 years old. So the roof that you mentioned before, all of these things, whilst they don't come in regularly,
Yeah. Do you want to know what
they are a cost.
Do you want to know what my costs have been on my rented unit in the last
What are your
couple
costs?
of years? $250 a week rent. That's it. That is it.
So
Nothing
when
else.
you rent, you can cap that cost, and you know what it is on a regular basis. There's no hidden cost, which is I haven't even written that down as a advantage, but it is.
Yeah.
So it's a really smooth advantage. There's no hidden cost.
Yeah.
So in this example, to hold that house of $350,000, it's a cost of $14,000 to hold that house.
Yeah.
Council rate's $3,500, insurance $3,500, and maintenance $7,000. Now I know your figures may differ from this slightly, but they'll probably be in that range. So if this person was to sell their $350,000 house and decide to rent, they would be able to rent a house or a unit for $400 per week, which is $20,800 per year. Now, besides the fact that it's probably going to be a better house for that price, and we are in regional Queensland. If you're listening from Sydney or somewhere like that, so we're in Townsville.
Yeah.
So these are the figures done in our city.
If you're in Sydney, just add a 0 to the end of it.
That's true, but you'd be selling your house for a much higher price as well. So your out of pockets here in selling and renting are only $6,800 per year. Now, how that equates again, so you rent at $400 per week if you were to rent a house, is $20,800 per year, but you're going to put the savings of $14,000 that you have, because you're not paying rates, you're not paying insurance, you're not paying maintenance on the house, towards that rent. So you're out of pocket only $6,800. Now, what you actually have an extra $350,000 that you can add to your superannuation. And there's recent legislation that's come in, so if you sell a house over the age of 65, there has been a problem in the past of actually putting money into your super fund. You can now do that through the downsizing contribution provisions. So you can get the money into your superannuation fund, and then you can get that into the tax-free account-based pension. So again, assuming an 8% rate of return on an extra $350,000, it's a tax-free rate of return of $28,000 per year. You take out $6,800 to go towards the rent, and it then provides you a little bit over $20,000 extra to take each year to travel, or to spend on retirement lifestyle. You may be short $350,000 in your retirement plan, just by virtue of the fact that you haven't had superannuation for as long as your children have had it. If you're listening to this at 60 or 65, so it's an effective way to top up your balance and to generate an extra $20,000 of real rate of return in this example each year that you could actually use to travel. If you wanted to dip into the extra capital of the $350,000, you can take more. And I actually have a client that's done this. So a client of mine is a single lady with about 5 years to go before retiring, and it took us quite. She was a homeowner. It took us quite a while. It took us about 2.5 years to come to this strategy that she wanted to sell her house and add the money to her superannuation and rent, and that was all driven by her lifestyle. So Liz, if you're listening, I'm talking about you. I know you won't mind. So over that 2.5 years of us meeting and talking about what her ideal lifestyle would be in retirement, a recurring theme kept coming up, and it was travel. So more and more travel. So we looked at it from a numbers point of view and worked out that if being a non-homer, by selling her home, renting, and she's actually rented a much nicer place that suits her a lot better, she would free up this money that could go into her superannuation fund, and she could draw somewhere in the vicinity of about an extra $20,000 a year once retired to fund travel. Which like I said, the decision wasn't entered into lightly, and it took us about 2.5 years to work to really go through that, to work that out. But she's done it. She loves it. She loves the new place. She's over and above where we thought she would be positioned from a financial point of view. Really, the only con is that, or the disadvantage to renting, is that you may have to move if the landlord sells the house. But it's a bit of a misnomer, because people think, what if the landlord kicks me out? I've talked to landlords before. They are looking for 65-year-old retired tenants. Is their dream tenant. They'll never kick you out unless they're selling the house. Because they're worried about the opposite. So they're worried about someone young coming into the house or the unit and wrecking it or not paying rent and all that. So they're actually looking for people that are retired to rent their rental houses.
As long as you don't have too many crazy parties or anything like that. Or...
That's right. Well, we're making assumptions here that at 65 you're not having all those parties. You're having some, but knocking on the head a bit earlier than midnight.
The only other disadvantage that I do hear about sometimes, and again, it's hard for me to wrap my head around this, because I'm the laziest man around the house that God ever put breath into. so I never want to do anything at home ever. There are a lot of people who do enjoy, doing a bit of work in the garden, working around the house, that kind of thing. I think I've come up with a solution. If you're that person and you don't want to rent because you want to do things around the house, come and talk to Michael. He'll let you do everything around his house. You can do all the work there, and you can rent your own place and work this strategy that might make more financial sense, and he'll let you do all that at his place.
This is true. I'll even pay you to do that. I'd rather stay here working on my clients' financial plans in retirement than do the gardening at my house. It's true.
The only other one I could think of as well, with the renting in particular, and also with the downsizing, is that freeing up this either $100,000 in the downsizing case, or the potentially much more than that if you were to rent. You really do have to be careful around how much of that money you are spending each year. So it's again an easy one to look at and go, in this example, we've freed up $350,000. Great, I'll spend $50,000 out of that this year because we want to go and buy a caravan and do that sort of thing. You do need to bear in mind that you are trading off the fact that you will have increased rent expenses over your retirement. So it's not free money in terms of you don't necessarily have all of that money to be drawn down and used in your early years of retirement. So it's really just about having a plan for, the money that we free up, how do we use that most effectively to either, like we say, only draw an income out of it that will allow your super balance to continue to grow, or to draw that down over time, but in a safe, sustainable way, so that you're not going to be running out of money before your life expectancy.
Agreed.
Yeah. So was there anything else, Michael, that in particular that you wanted to talk about with regards to these sort of different options with your house leading up to and into retirement?
I think we covered most of them. Obviously, it's going to be different for everyone, so we've tried to use an example that would suit a lot of people and suit a typical client. However, it will be different for everyone, so do your research. Like I said, the look at the disadvantages, the main ones of selling and downsizing or renting that we see come around the transaction. So it's actually buying the replacement home before selling your existing one. Yeah. Not looking at the true costs of the move. Yeah. And there may be other costs than that as well, but if we look at the real estate, advertising, stamp duty, legals, conveyance, we say it's somewhere in the vicinity of $20,000 to $25,000 of money that's gone. Yeah. And looking at the effect that it may have on what you would receive from settling via the age pension. Yeah. We're happy to talk to anyone who's listening, either over the phone or in person, at no obligation to look at these things. Yeah. Look at these types of issues. But apart from that, I think we've pretty much covered everything. Yep,
and that's, I guess, the point that you make there is that it's not necessarily, in a half an hour discussion, we're not going to be able to have a black and white answer for every person to do the same thing, whether that's keep, downsize or rent. It is really just something to think about as you start planning for your retirement, as a way to think, what else can I be doing to potentially meet my retirement goals sooner or quicker, or live a bit of a better lifestyle in retirement. Is that it is just an option to think about and to maybe get your head around well in advance of making any major decisions on this. So it's really important to be comfortable with, like we say, the disadvantages and advantages of each of these strategies, and just to make a decision that is best suited for you and what you want. So I think that's it from us today. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll speak to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Money Over 50 podcast with Lighthouse Financial Advisors. We look forward to catching up again soon.